Well, today I want to talk about the prodigal son, and it's a parable that we're all familiar with. But thinking about it, I thought there's some pretty valuable lessons that we could learn from it. So I thought I'd go over the parable that's found in Luke 15, if you want to turn there, and we'll just have a look at the parable and of some of the lessons that we can draw from it. In Luke 15, beginning in verse 11, then he said, this is Christ speaking, a certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me. So he divided to them his livelihood. Verse 13, and not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living. But when he had spent all there was, there arose a severe famine in that land, and he began to be in want. Then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. And he arose and came to his father. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Bring out the best robe, and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand, and sandals on his feet. And bring the fatted calf here, and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead, and is alive again. He was lost, and is found. And they began to be merry. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. What's all this noise? He was probably wondering. So he called one of his servants and asked him what was the meaning of all these things, what did these things meant. And he said to him, Your brother has come, and because he has received him safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf. But he was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. And he answered and said to his father, Lo, these many years I have been serving you. I have never transgressed your commandment at any time. And yet you never gave me a young goat that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this son of yours came and has devoured your livelihood with harlots, you killed the fatted calf for him. And he said to him, Son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was right that we should make merry and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found. Now, we have basically 3 aspects of this story, right? We have the son, and the elder son, and the father. So what transpired here? So let's look at the son. It says, the younger of them said to his father, Give me my portion of goods that falls to me, and he divided them his livelihood. This is in verse 12, and I'm reading verse 12 on here. And many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed into a far country, and there wasted his possession with prodigal living. And when he had spent all, there arose a famine in that land, and he began to be in want. Then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into the fields to feed swine. So things went really downhill for him. And he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants." So what happened is he basically asked for his inheritance up front. Okay? He wasted it all on what? Prodigal living. My son was telling me that they were interviewing, a TV station was interviewing a guy that had tremendous, he'd come across some tremendous wealth, a real windfall, in the millions of dollars. And when they were talking to him, the guy was dead broke. So they said, well, what happened to all the money? And he said, I spent it on wine, woman, and song, and the rest I just wasted. I mean, yeah. I mean, my son was laughing his head off. He says, yeah, this is what he said, but I mean, he just blew it all. And you know, it's amazing. If you got money, right, and you want to blow it, and you go into a bar, and you're going to buy free drinks, oh, you'll have lots of people at the table. You'll have lots of friends, and you keep buying every day, you keep buying the free drinks, and they're all there. And all of a sudden, when the money dries up, you suddenly notice there's not so many people at your table. And a little bit later, there's only a few at the table, and later on, you're all alone at the table because you're broke and they don't have nothing to do with you. You're not this big flush guy anymore. So, I mean, that's human nature. You want to blow your money around, you got all kinds of friends. Now, because of a famine, he was in need, and literally the party was over. And he gets a job, when you think of it, feeding swine, since he was out of money, and he had lost all his friends, and, Klingons, you might call them. And furthermore, no one gave him anything, and he was reduced to, eating what the swine were eating. But verse 17 is the key. It says, when he came to himself, in other words, when he realized just what he had done and how far down he had gotten, he had a turnaround. His father's servants had plenty, and he was perishing from hunger. So he decides to return in a humble frame of mind, prepared to be treated as a servant. Now that's his mindset. He was willing to go back and just be treated as a servant. Now, there's one other player, well, there's two more, but I want to look at the father right now. In Luke 15 and verse 20. So this is in regards to the father. And he arose and came to his father. This is the son. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring in his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. And then continuing on in verse 24, For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He has lost and is found, and they began to be merry. So they were really celebrating. Now his older brother, who was in the field, and as it came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called to one of his servants and asked him what these things meant. And he said to him, Your brother has come, and because he has received him safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf. But he was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. Now notice a few things what happened here. The father was glad and took him back because he could see his attitude. and that he was truly sorry for what he had done. The father could see that. The father was extremely happy and put the best robe on him and made him a feast, and they were happy and joyful. Also notice, the father did not bring up what he had done. In other words, he didn't throw it in his face about all the sins he had committed. He didn't, rub his nose in it. That wasn't even brought up. Now, I'd like to go to the third aspect of this, and that's the older son. Looking at his attitude. The older son, Luke 15 and verse 25 to 32. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of his servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, "Your brother has come because he has received him safe and sound. Your father has killed the fatted calf." But he was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. And he answered and said to his father, "Lo, these many years I have been serving you. I never transgressed your commandment at any time, and yet you never gave me a young goat that I might be merry and with my friends. But as soon as this your son came, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots, you killed the fatted calf for him." And he said to him, "Son, you are always with me. All that I have is yours. It was right that we should make merry and be glad for your brother. For your brother was dead and is alive and has lost. He was lost and is found." Now, the older son had an attitude problem, and he got mad, okay? He was probably jealous, a little bit of jealousy there. Notice he brought up his brother's sins, where the father didn't. He says, "Oh yeah, look at what you're doing for him. He went and spent all this money with harlots." Now I want to go back to the father again, because this is what the father did. He reminded him that since he was always with him, his reward was secure, and that his brother had been lost and now was found or back in the good graces of his father. Now you can think of two people in the place of safety, right? And they're talking to each other. And one says, "I've been in the church 50 years. I went through all kinds of trials. I mean, my neighbors persecuted me. My kids hated me. I mean, I went through sickness and disease. Am I ever glad to be here?" And the other guy says, "Well, man," he says, "I was in the church about 3 months, and here I am." And he says, 3 months? I mean, look at everything I had to go through, and you were there for 3 months? I mean, life isn't fair. This is the attitude of the older son, right? But the principle is, two people in the place of safety, one's been there for 3 months. It doesn't take away from the reward of the person that was in the church for 50 years, does it? If they are faithful to the end, they'll both be in the kingdom of God. So, in a sense, why would you complain about God's mercy on the one that was called 3 months ago and he's in the same location as you? So what can we learn from this? Some have left the church for whatever reasons, right? And in the process have made mistakes for which they have to suffer the consequences. There's always consequences for sin. Now, when they come back and want to turn their lives around, how do we receive them? In the church, a brother that wants to come back because he was kind of like the prodigal son. Do we throw all his sins in his face, or do we receive him with joy and gladness like the father did, his son? And as time goes on, brethren, I think there'll be more people coming, either from other groups or that have left the church and have come back, and it's imperative that we treat them in the right way. Let's not forget how God responds to a sinner turning from his ways. And that's found in Luke 15 and verse 10, which reflects God's attitude about this whole situation. Luke 15 and verse 10, Christ speaking, he says, "Likewise I say to you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." So, if and when we have individuals coming to us that have perhaps been like the prodigal son, our attitude should be one of joy and happiness that they finally made a turnaround in their lives and not in a position to start throwing their sins in their face, because the father in the story never brought up the sins of the son. He was happy to have him back. They threw a big party. There was joy. There was happiness. Now, the older son had a bit of an attitude problem, but I mean, I think those are the lessons we can learn from the prodigal son. Be happy and joyful when someone turns from his ways.